Greetings and welcome explorers to a new exploration. We're going to begin this video by making a comparison between the Cambridge Law School and the Ann Arbor, Michigan Law School. See if you can tell which one we're looking at as we go through these visuals. Starting with this one, where do you think this is? Built several hundred years ago in Cambridge in the UK? Or Ann Arbor, Michigan in the early 1900s. Yep, this one's Cambridge. What about this one? A couple hundred years old or less than 100 years old? If you said Ann Arbor, Michigan, you would be correct. What about this beautiful view here? Sort of has that old feeling, brickwork very tidy. Are you leaning towards Cambridge? Well, you'd be wrong. We're still in Michigan. How about this one? Okay, Cambridge. A couple hundred years old. This one? Yeah, Michigan. 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 And finally, Michigan. Ann Arbor, Michigan. Let's look a little closer. Alright, let's start with the geographical location. You can see Ann Arbor right here, not far from Detroit, Michigan, a real metropolis of the old world. But Ann Arbor, not a large town by any means. And just for a little historical perspective, we can see the population demographics over time. That, of course, we can never really fully trust. Modern day, 120,000 people. They say about 30 plus thousand people are employed by the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. You can see at 1900 we're looking at 14,000 people living here. Much of what we're going to be looking at will have been built in this time period again, even by 1920. Not even 20,000 people living here. So we're seeing all sorts of stonework and majesty in the architecture, really not befitting of a town with such a small size. And we're going to keep that in mind as we roll through the visuals of many of the buildings that once stood and some still stand. Starting with the cookhouse. Just a depiction. And a couple of the old bits of architecture from the 1800s. You have the old courthouse, post office, old post office, and an old high school, which we'll be taking a closer look at. I always find it interesting when you see these types of buildings in these small towns. Much of this slide show will be buildings from the University of Michigan itself, apparently founded in 1837. But really, as you take a closer look, you're seeing buildings that seem to have much more age than the narrative will permit. There are some that will date back to that early time period, mid-1800s, many of them supposedly having gone up in the early 1900s, but as you look into it, very difficult to pin down a build date, a start time, an end time, or end date for these structures. So certainly worth highlighting as evidence of a potential old world civilization and a repurposing. And you're going to see quite a few amazing churches like I mentioned, quite a few built with stone. Not befitting, again, of that very low population for that period of time. Even on a building like this, homeopathic hospital, you can see all the stonework reaching up to here, most likely switching to brick at that level, which would require quite a bit of work. The Maplehurst Hospital. Let's zoom in a little bit on some of the features here. This is a classic old world feature that we see. Very difficult. We don't do these days. It's just not something that anyone would really incorporate into a plan because of the amount of time, money, and skill that it would take to build in such a manner. We just don't see it. But of course, in the 1800s, in places like Ann Arbor, it was not a problem. Then we get a street scene, just to get a feel, get that vibe, 1800s vibe, early 1900s. You can see the bricks again in the street. Just barely make them out here. I think they're telling us this is the savings bank. There's a courthouse in the background. Nice streetcar view. Classic old world depiction. There's the state savings bank. Very, very heavy stonework. You have the low windows, you have this, often you'll have this on the sidewalks as well, some sort of grate indicating there's much more going on below. Remember again the size of the location. We have to hold that in our mind as we go through this. All of this architecture and infrastructure does not make sense for such a small city. And we do have the railroad arriving early in Ann Arbor, 1839 we are told, the Michigan Central Railroad. There's a quick peek again at the law buildings at the University of Michigan. Again, something you would expect at a place like Cambridge in the UK, having been built in the 1600s, 1700s. Not something you'd expect them to have built over a 10-year period in the 20s into the 30s, right through the Great Depression, and very little visual evidence of the construction process, of course. We have an old city hall, no longer stands. Couldn't find much on this one. Here's an old high school from 1894, from a time period where there was less than 10,000 people living here. You have to ask yourself the question, really, why would they build a high school in such a manner for such a small city? The extravagance does not fit the needs for the time, as we've been told. So there's a disconnect, again, in the historical narrative. I'm here to point that out for you. There's YMCA. There's so many structures on this campus, this University of Michigan campus. I believe that's the Wolverines. They have a massive stadium as well. I'm not going to highlight that in the video. The whole professional sports, not even, this isn't professional I suppose, but this is still somewhat close. American football, American college sports, right on par with what we would consider professional sports as far as funding and coverage and all those things go. They get over 100,000 people watching their games a lot of the time. So here's that old post office. They're calling this the Beale Block. I don't have a lot on this. It really is amazing structure. It's again one of those things that looks like they attempted to bury it, and I could see why. Very difficult to explain why somebody would build in this manner for that period of time, as far as the history we're given allows for. It really doesn't make sense. A little bit more of a close-up of that roof line. You can see the gate tech and all of these implying some sort of harnessing of the ether tech that went on that many of us have looked into in these old world buildings. This is the Bethlehem German Church. Here's a good example of what I was talking about, the stonework. And there's no question these can date back into the 1800s. Many of them very difficult to find a build date. But you can see how impeccable the stonework is. Even these, this is not a cross, this is a church. What is this supposed to be? Weather vane? And there we have it from another view. Just really giving you that sense of age. Like it's been around as long as that Cambridge building. Several hundred years. That's the feeling I get from this. One of many multi-storied structures. Beautiful mansard style roof up here. Balcony. Nice building. And very interesting, you have the curved stonework. Very difficult, all of this. Circular windows, arched windows in stone. This styling, again, I've seen it quite a bit recently, where you have the ridge line coming to that. It's not a hip roof at all. This is a cone, partial cone roof structure. Very extravagant, detailed work. And then you see buildings like this, which I often suspect they've probably been decapitated or scaled back. And you can see on the bottom, just barely make it out in this postcard, that there was probably much more going on up here because we're seeing all sorts of detail here. It's just my hunch on that one. A chemical laboratory there, you can see a lot of the detail. One of the libraries. We'll see a few more. And again, you get these classic postcards with all the trees in the way. Why would you depict a building and put the trees in the front? I always find that funny. Maybe it's supposed to be a quaint view of the nature and the architecture. Possibly. Maybe that's just my frustration. Sometimes I can only find one of those types of postcards for a building, which I often wish I could see a lot more. Alright, the Memorial Tower. And I'll just quickly read out a few of the points that Wikipedia gives us. Built in 1936, just 1 year, I guess. A lot going up in the 30s, 20s and 30s, apparently, at this location. The world's fourth heaviest carillon of bells, containing 53 bells, weighing a total of 43 tons. And the nurse's home. So many of these structures in postcard form. The old chemical laboratory. Looking and feeling very old world. Get the arched entryways. Interesting postcard, where they make us work. This is from 05. Remember how many people lived here in 05? And just to highlight that, let's take a look. You have very little growth going on in Ann Arbor in that first decade of the 20th century, which is where a lot of these supposedly are going up in this time period here. Even between 1910 and 1920, it's not a lot. So, interesting to take note of. Apparently Ann Arbor, Michigan, one of the best places in the United States to raise a family. I think they rank at second in recent polls, whatever you want to call those. Which is interesting. This is also interesting. Look at the lay of the land, looking very uneven for this observatory, part of the university. Really, half the town must be affiliated in some way with the university. It's just based on the population. It's a university town, a classic university town. And many of the frat houses, you'll see several in this presentation. Here's the Phi Kappa Psi. Yet another school. A lot of postcards on this one too, because it's very difficult to find photographs of many of these structures. And of course, if you like these videos, don't forget to like and sub. Throw your comments in there, especially if you know anything about the area that I've highlighted in this particular video. Always interesting to hear your stories. You know much more about these locations than I do. I'm just trying to bring you the visuals. So. The educational building looking very techy, decked out. The old fire station. Nice looking brick building. They give us a date of 1882, which again is very early. Less than 10,000 people living here at the time. You'd think a much smaller structure would suffice. I live in a town of 80,000 people, and our fire station is not even at this scale of size, so make of it what you will. The Clements Library. Nice looking structure. Let's look at the inside. The only information I can find on this as far as the build is mentions that this was founded in 1923. No mention of the start and stop date of the build. Just founded by William Clements. Supposedly a rare book depository for the university, this one. So founded in 1923, whatever that means. Doesn't mean much to me. They sure did founded it, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Nice street scene for you. We'll take a closer look at this building moving forward as well. There's the fire station there. Sort of the early automobiles. So early street scene of Ann Arbor, Michigan. That's the Cornwell Coal Building. It's very. This is fairly unique to the way that they've sort of built the little towers into the cornice bump outs here, for lack of a better term. It's a pretty unique structure. And we get to the courthouse now. So this is the Washtenaw County Courthouse. Apparently built in 1878 when there was less than 8,000 people living here. They tore this down in the 50s, it looks like. It's hard to pin down a date on that. It became the parking lot for the new courthouse, is how that story goes. So really, 1878 to the 50s, this building did not stand for 100 years. Not making sense. Again, one of those hurry up and tear it down narratives, I think, that we can thoroughly rely on. A way of scrubbing the past, and it's also obscure. You have to kind of search to get those details. Even though I had a little difficulty trying to get that build date, which is I find suspicious. You think Wikipedia would have a nice, bright, full page for us on that, but they don't. And I referenced Wikipedia because it's supposed to be that open source information resource, online information resource. So it's like a pool of information, supposedly, supposed to be, which is why I always reference it. I get sometimes criticized, why do you go to Wikipedia? Well, if this information is available out there, it should also be on Wikipedia. But it's often not the case, so I'm just trying to illustrate that point as well. So this is as much a critique of Wikipedia as it is of the historical narrative. So we're looking at the engineering building. We're going to look at it now from the back side of here. So this is a modern day shot of what it looks like from the inside of that corner that we were just looking at. Really, these are screaming old world to me. I don't know about you. What do you think? And there's an old depiction just to show you that how far back in time these things are stretching. This is the First National Bank, having that Art Deco styling. A little bit of a closer look from the street, just to show you some of the detail. And this type of detailing, just a giveaway to me that something more is going on here. And that whole Art Deco period, closer to us in time than the 1800s, obviously. So it's a very strange one. I think it's hard to pin down what exactly has gone on here. Here is the inside of that bank, but I think it's worth highlighting. and very interesting to explore. The possibilities. Are we looking at some sort of timeline merge? Who knows? Just a thought. First Congregational. I love the roof here. The roof detailing. Would you take a look at that? Beautiful. And of course the stonework. You can see here the windows going down into the ground. The old Masonic block. Yet another high school. You have the columns. Very typical style building, it seems like, in Ann Arbor. Small city of Ann Arbor, Michigan. The Hill Auditorium. You can see the tower in the background. Early time period here again. 40s probably, this one. Let's take a look at the inside of the Hill Auditorium, having a spectacular pipe organ. So ticking those boxes, we see these all over the States as well. These massive pipe organs. Not really making a lot of sense, like why, what's the reason for that? And again, you have some curious wording. They're saying that it opened in 1913, that's all we get. Why opening in 1913, why are we featuring this as a part of the build? Like, is it really that important at that period of time to have a massive pipe organ in there? Gotta ask these questions, you know. Well, let's jump back there real quick. Another street scene for you. Horse and buggy era. About 10,000 people, maybe a little bit more, living in Ann Arbor at the time, we are told. Chemical laboratory building. You see the cupola back here, and another one back here. And you've got some suspicious figures, as far as I'm concerned. Looking a bit ominous, not looking too cheery whatsoever. Like, cheer up, bud. Alright, the intramural building. Beautiful bricker with the nice arch. Here's a modern day view of that. Impeccable brickwork. Interesting too how they work this brick styling. This is like a parquet style almost. Really amazing brickwork going on there. Okay, let's get to that law quadrangle again, which we looked at the beginning of the video. This is an aerial view of what we're dealing with here. And we'll quickly pop over to Wikipedia here. They tell us built between 24 and 33, so that's a 9-year period of time when they should have been easily documenting this whole construction process. And they give you all the details of who donated and where and all the rest of it, but let's look at these. And I'll tell you right away, when I first did the research on this location, these buildings really jumped out at me as looking and feeling much, much older than 90 years old. And this is really a classic case of how most of us just take history at face value. We believe what we're being told, because why would they lie, right? We always just believe what we're being told. We look at this and we think, is this supposed to be new construction for the time this photograph was taken? I don't have a date on it, but good lord, this is old. Much older than they're telling us. So really not making any sense to me. Having the very similar weathering as to what we see on those buildings in places like the UK, which they're telling us have been standing for much, much longer, 300-400 years. And we'll do a couple shots of that library here. We saw this one again. You could see the woodwork running down the two sides. This is very Hogwarts-ish, for those of you that are familiar with the Harry Potter series. I mean, come on. Michigan, Ann Arbor, Michigan. They built this in the 20s, early 30s, right through the Depression. Right through the Depression. I don't think so. I'm casting seeds of doubt on this one, folks. I'd like to know who they accredit this ceiling to. What do you think? Impeccable brickwork, stonework. There it is again. It's not even brick, it is stonework. You can see how it all goes together. Amazing. And then of course you have this on the underside of the arches because you have time, I guess, to build it. And I tricked you again. This is Cambridge. Where's the difference, really? Which one looks older? Do they both look about the same age? You tell me. They are obscuring our history, folks, as far as I'm concerned. And then we can't really verify because none of us were there. All we can do is take documented accounts, verbal accounts, I suppose. I don't think there's many of those left either. It's like playing that old game of telephone, you know? Looking very old. Look at this up here. The message gets distorted down through time. And they like to put their little statues on the corners, though. And try to trick us into believing that they built them. Early time period. Supposedly this was a new building at the time. And they do provide us with a construction photo. Now this is interesting. You see all the blocks here? Not looking like at all like the stonework we were looking at. This is all looking like perfect rectangular blocks. Almost like cinder. Not quite, but perfect rectangular blocks not fitting the material that's going on. And also we are looking at a finished roof line. So where are they putting these bricks in this photo? Not really making any sense at all. I don't think so. I don't buy it. That's the construction photo we're given for that 9-year period. Like they couldn't come out and give us something better than that? I don't think so. There it is. There's the library from the outside. Worth featuring. So spectacular. Having that cathedral look. So they just threw this around in the 20s in Ann Arbor, Michigan. No problem. We're going to build a cathedral library. Anyway, let's move on from this. Back to that old Masonic block. And we have the temple. Interesting look on the front here. Some interesting detailing. And again, you get that boxy look. You see this with some of the temples. I wonder what alterations were made to the original structure. It's almost like they enclosed, possibly, a more ornate structure. I'm not sure. Total speculation, of course. All right, we have one of the early rail depots, postcard form. Let's look at a photograph just to get, again, the sense of the stonework on here. And we have 1886 as a build date on here. I like the eyebrow dormers for a little bit of flair. Nice job, guys. Beautiful work. 1886, I guess that means it all just was slapped together in 1 year. Michigan winters. Any of you out there familiar with Michigan winters? Add your comments below. I'm sure that they're pretty harsh. So yeah, when we're factoring in build time, we have to factor those conditions into as well to how difficult it would have been to put these things up. Old medical building. Here, let's jump back to that. Erected in 1847. And Wikipedia doesn't even provide census data for 1847. It starts in 1860 at 5,000. So there had to be only a handful of thousand people in Ann Arbor. And here's a handful of that handful, I suppose. What do you make of these odd fellows? Something strange about it all, isn't there? Not really feeling like a bunch of university students, medical school students. That's what they're supposed to be. All right, not a great photo, this one, the Michigan League building. Let's keep moving here. Newberry Hall. Stonework. Amazing. Look down here. That must be the root cellar. The Nichols Arcade. These are interesting. We come across these, and you see these in many of the cities again across the states. The old arcades. These are amazing. If you live in a place that has one of these, I definitely suggest you go check it out. Get your camera out. Send me some pics if you can. Nichols Arcade. Very interesting. I love these. See the brickwork in there. Moving on. There's the old library, apparently. The old University of Michigan library. Beautiful. Look at this. Circular. Very difficult to do. Basement windows. Love it. I think we're looking at the Opera House here in the foreground, because you had to have an opera house in Ann Arbor, Michigan, even though there was less than 10,000 people there. There it is. And there's have all the details. In case you had any doubt, all the details are there. Heated with steam, lighted with gas. In case you were wondering. The Orpheum. Yes, we have an Orpheum in Ann Arbor. These are the Planeta Apartments, old buildings. Old post office, not to be confused with the other post office we looked at. You often see that as well. Presbyterian Church, 1872 to 1935. This thing was torn down. Massive structure, could have easily been designated possibly a city hall or something like that. Very difficult to do a roof in such a manner. You could see the two slopes here. Very difficult work there. How many builders are we allowing for Ann Arbor to have at that early time period? How many people? If so many people were going to the school, how many builders were there? Psi Upsilon, another frat. I'm not sure what that is. Is that a flagpole? Strange. Part of the school again. The columns, archways, beautiful architecture. Another part of the school. No shortage of old world splendor in Ann Arbor, Michigan, folks. Look at that. You have to love it. You cannot say that any of this would have been, easy to do. This is all there's a reason we don't do this or this now. Okay, and it doesn't have to do with, I don't think it has to do with time and money and all the rest of it. I think it has more to do with the ability and the reason why. We don't even think to do it because there's no value in that. Here it is. This is a much better visual just to give you some depth of that architecture. And then look at the stonework. So your building looking like, is this octagonal? I think it's octagonal. So each of these has a face, and you have to make sure all the stonework fits in and plane in against each other at the face of the octagon. It's absolutely mind-blowing, that type of work. And of course you got some gargoyles coming off of here. St. Andrews, this one. Amazing. There it is again. Old, early time period. Only a couple thousand people living there at the time. But enough people apparently to make all sorts of churches like this. This is the St. Thomas Roman Catholic Church. Would you look at that? 1, 2, 3 towers. Wow. And in case you needed a closer look at that, take a look at the stonework. I know it's a bit grainy. Amazing. These are huge. And there it is again, the church, and then in the foreground here we are looking at a school, it looks like. That's possibly the high school we've seen already. Not sure though. Now the St. Thomas Church. Let me know when you've seen enough churches. Let me know. Very large stonework again. Amazing structures for such a small town. Okay, we might have seen that one already. Psychiatric hospital. Had to have one. Yet another theater. You have a architect's sketch of the proposed theater. This is always interesting too. We get sketches of proposed buildings. This one apparently was built. Many of these sketches, they say, were never built, and they're just an architect's sketch, which I propose are buildings that did once stand and have been torn down and erased from history. Yet another theater, the Whitney Theater. An interior for you. Though I'm not sure which theater interior this one is, but just so you know, at a time period when there was about 15,000 people living in Ann Arbor, they were said to have been building like this. Makes no sense, folks. The Ann Arbor Trust Company, columns on the top floor. Somebody should make a song about that. Columns on the top floor. You get these coming off the side too. These are interesting. Something to do with the energy harnessing. Beautiful building. Wow. Postcard. There's that Union building we saw earlier. You can get a sense of the age with all the vines. Amazing. Very old. All right. This is also the Union building, but I think the original one. Sorry. Let me look it up. Actually, this one looking like the University Hall. I did find this on Twain's Geography website. Looks like they're telling us looking like 1871 project. They give us the cost down to the penny. Thank you, that's detail. But they give us a vague year. This is just a one-year project. The original dome was removed in 1896, we're told, and then the whole thing was demolished in 1950, we are told. And let's take a closer look at this structure. Alright, so there we have it. Maybe this is the new dome. I'm not sure. I do have one other photograph. Here, let's first of all, I'll show you a postcard. It seems like there's some distortion going on here. Not looking at all like the photograph that I found. This is really telling to me. Yet another structure we are told did not last 100 years. Take a look at these. This is a very unique shape. It's sort of the fence type of a feature on top. What an amazing structure. But we're going to move on because we have to. We're getting close to the end of the file here. The Unitarian Church, more stonework, more of the same. Really could look at these for long periods of time. Interesting how the peak is stoned as well. Beautiful. Just a quick jump back to that angle hall, let's say. Just to get a sense of the detail in the ceiling, columns, interior. Beautiful. Waterman Gymnasium, all part of the university. Much more going on at University of Michigan, folks, than meets the eye. I'm sure they're not teaching that in the books at the school there. Just churning out competent professionals. People who will trust in whatever they're told there. The Yost Fieldhouse. Beautiful. Look at the arches. It's a heck of a project right there. And one more frat for you. The Zeta Psi. And here we're looking at the tearing down of a church. Just to finish our file on this picture. So what's your take on Ann Arbor, Michigan? What did you expect? Did you know anything about the place? I didn't know much. I'd only heard of it in relation to Detroit and University of Michigan. So I think we're looking at an old world city with much more there than meets the eye. Thanks for watching.